The morning my parents signed their house over to my sister for her wedding, nobody called me. I found out from the wedding photographer's invoice, of all things, forwarded to me because I handle the family money. For 5 years I had been paying the mortgage on that house. 5 years of quiet transfers so my parents wouldn't lose the place I grew up in. They gave it away in an afternoon and didn't think to mention my name. I keep other people's books for a living. I just never thought I'd have to open my own for my family. 2 months later, they asked to move into my lake house. When I said no, my mother only smiled and walked away. And the next morning, there was a police officer standing on my doorstep. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get the last word and every receipt tells the truth. If stories about family, boundaries, and earned justice are why you're here, settle in. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Tori Sinclair, and I'm 34 years old. I own a small bookkeeping practice in a town outside Dayton, Ohio. It's not glamorous work. I reconcile accounts for dentists and landscapers and a bakery that can never find its own receipts. People think numbers are cold. I think numbers are the most honest thing in a room full of people lying to themselves. I'm the steady one. That's the word my family always used for me, the way you'd describe a reliable car. Steady Tori. She doesn't need much. She never complains. And for most of my life, I wore that word like it was a compliment, because being needed felt close enough to being loved. 5 years ago, my father called me on a Tuesday night. I remember because Tuesdays were when I closed the books for the week, and I almost let it go to voicemail. His voice was wrong. Too careful. He told me they were 3 payments behind on the house, that the bank had sent a letter with a word in it that scared him, and that he didn't know how to tell my mother. I sat there with my pen still in my hand. I didn't ask why they hadn't planned better. I just said I'd help. But I told him I'd do it my way, and he was so relieved he didn't ask what that meant. My way was simple. I started covering the mortgage the next month, paid straight to the servicer so nothing slipped, but I also did the thing my profession had trained into my hands. I drew up a short note each year. A promissory note. Plain language. No lawyer needed for the basic version. It said that the money I sent toward the house was a loan, not a gift, and that my parents acknowledged the amount. I printed it on regular paper. I brought it to Sunday dinner with a pen. I told them it was for clean taxes, that the IRS gets twitchy about large family transfers, and I didn't want a headache come April. That part was even true. My mother waved her hand and said I worried too much. My father put on his reading glasses, then took them off again, and signed without really looking. They both signed. Every year, same kitchen table, same pen, same little speech about taxes. They never read past the first line. To them, it was paperwork, the kind of thing the daughter who does numbers always has. To me, it was the only way I knew to love someone and protect myself at the same time. I filed each note in a hard plastic box on the top shelf of my office closet. By the 5th year, there were 5 sheets in there, plus printed bank statements, every transfer highlighted in yellow. I didn't think of it as a weapon. I thought of it as memory. I just never learned how to throw away a promise. That box would sit untouched for years, until the afternoon my sister got engaged. I should tell you about the lake house, because everyone in my family has a version of it that isn't true. 4 years ago, I landed the biggest contract of my career. A regional chain of vet clinics hired me to clean up a decade of tangled books, and the work paid more than I'd ever made at once. I didn't buy a car. I didn't take a trip. I bought a small 2-bedroom cottage on Lake Loramie, 40 minutes north of town, because I had always wanted one quiet place that no one could take a payment out of. I put it in my name. Only my name. I paid cash for most of it and financed the rest myself. The first summer, I made the mistake of inviting my parents up for a week. My mother fell in love with the dock and the way the light came off the water at 6 in the evening. They came back the next summer and the one after, and somewhere in there the language changed. It stopped being Tori's place. It became the family lake house, the cabin we go to. My mother would tell her friends about our little spot on the water like she held a key, and I never corrected her, because correcting my mother in front of her friends was a thing I'd been trained out of by the time I was 9. I told myself it didn't matter whose name was on the deed. A house is a house. Let her have the story. I didn't understand yet that the story was the whole point. Whoever owns the story thinks they own the house. My sister Megan is 5 years younger than me, and she got engaged in the spring to a man named Brent Wallace. Brent sells commercial insurance and talks about it the way some men talk about combat. The engagement turned my mother into a different person, lighter, busier, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Suddenly there were menus and venues, and a color called dusty sage that I heard about constantly. I was happy for Megan. I want that on the record. But within 2 weeks, a familiar gravity took hold. The one that has organized my whole family since I was small. Whatever Megan needed, I would quietly provide. My mother said it at the kitchen table, over a binder of seating charts, without even looking up. "You'll help with the deposits, won't you, Tori? You're the steady one. Megan needs the help." She said it like a fact about the weather, not a question. I felt the old reflex move through me, the yes already forming before I'd decided anything. Megan needs the help. I had heard that sentence in 100 shapes across 30 years. Megan needs the bigger room. Megan needs the car for the weekend. Megan's having a hard semester. Go easy on her. I was the one who didn't need things, which I'd slowly come to understand meant I was the one whose needs were invisible. I said I'd look at the numbers. My mother smiled, satisfied, and turned a page. I drove back to my apartment that night and sat in the dark for a while. Something was coming. I could feel it the way you feel a storm in your teeth. I just didn't know it would arrive wearing a tuxedo. Here is the part that's hard to explain to people who grew up feeling wanted. Being the steady one is not the same as being loved, but it's close enough that you stop checking the difference. I built my whole adult self around being the person who could be counted on. I paid the mortgage. I did everyone's taxes for free. I was the emergency contact, the airport ride, the co-signer. And in exchange, I got to feel essential, which when you're starved is a perfectly acceptable substitute for cherished. But essential is a quiet kind of lonely. You learn that nobody asks the load-bearing wall how its day went. They just lean. For 5 years, I leaned back against that house and held it up, and not once did anyone say thank you in a way that cost them anything. I didn't need the thank you. That's what I told myself. I needed the work, the proof, the receipts. As long as the numbers reconciled, I was fine. That spring, planning Megan's wedding, I started having a low hum of dread I couldn't name. My mother kept asking offhand questions. How much did the lake house cost again? Whether the upstairs bedroom had its own heat. Whether the dock would hold a wheelchair someday, just in case. I answered them all lightly. I told myself she was being sentimental about getting older. I even mentioned it to my friend Nina, a paralegal I've known since community college, and she gave me a long look over her coffee and said, "Make sure your paperwork's in order, Tori." I laughed. I told her my paperwork is always in order. I just didn't yet know what for. The wedding was in June, at a barn venue with string lights and exactly the dusty sage everything. I paid for more of it than I'll say here. I sat at a family table near the front, and I clapped at the right times, and I meant most of it. Megan looked beautiful. Then, during the toasts, my father stood up. This was unusual. My father does not like standing up in rooms. He had a paper in his hand that shook a little, and he cleared his throat twice, and my mother watched him with a pride so fierce it was almost frightening. He said that he and my mother wanted to give Megan and Brent a gift to start their life, something lasting, something that said this family takes care of its own. And then he said it. They were giving the kids the house, the family house, free and clear, signed over that very week, so the newlyweds would never have to worry about rent or a landlord the way young couples do. The barn erupted. People stood. Somebody cried. Brent put his hand over his heart like he'd been knighted. My mother was beaming at me, actually at me, like I should be the proudest one in the room. and I sat very still with a champagne flute going warm in my hand, doing the only thing I know how to do under pressure. I did the math. The house they had just given away, free and clear, was the house I had carried on my back for 5 years so it would still exist to give. Nobody in that barn knew that. My parents had simply forgotten to carry the number forward. I didn't make a scene. Making a scene was never in my vocabulary, and besides, what would I even have said? I covered the loan that saved the house you just gave to someone else, in front of 200 guests and a string quartet? No. I smiled and I clapped, because I am very, very good at the thing my family taught me. But underneath the table, my free hand had closed into a fist so tight, my nails left 4 small crescents in my palm. I found them the next morning and almost laughed. 5 years. The word kept repeating like a stuck meter. 5 years of payments, made invisible the instant they weren't needed anymore. I want to pause here, because I know a lot of you watching have been the load-bearing wall in your own family. You know what it is to give until it's just expected. To have your sacrifice digested so completely that no one even tastes it anymore. If that's you, do me a favor right now. Put one hand on your chest and remember that being dependable is a gift you choose to give, not a debt you owe by being born first. Then leave a comment with one word for the family member who leaned hardest. I read them all. Back in the barn, I got through the rest of the night on autopilot. I hugged my sister. I told her I was happy, and the strange thing is, I was, in a sealed-off room of my heart that had nothing to do with the rest of me. It was only in the car, 40 minutes of dark county road, that I let myself feel the size of it. Then I went home and I climbed the step stool to the top shelf of my office closet. The box was right where I'd left it, a little dusty, the lid stiff from years unopened. I sat on my office floor in my wedding clothes and went through it slowly. 5 promissory notes, 1 for each year, each with 2 signatures I knew better than my own. Carol Sinclair, Ray Sinclair. Beneath them, the bank statements, every transfer I'd ever made highlighted in the same yellow marker, the running total written in my own neat hand at the bottom of the last page. It was a real number. Not a fortune, but the kind of figure that changes a retirement, the kind a young couple would feel for years. I sat with it. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't a movie moment. It wasn't triumph. It was grief. Mostly. The specific grief of finally seeing clearly what you'd spent years not letting yourself see. They didn't forget the money because they're cruel. They forgot it because I had made myself so easy to forget. I had wrapped my help in tax talk and silence and waved hands, and they had simply accepted the gift the way you accept good weather, without wondering who arranged the sky. I closed the box. I did not call anyone. I did not send a furious text. I had no plan yet, only a quiet certainty settling into me like sediment. I would not be making the next payment, and I would never again let anyone in my family tell me what I did and didn't need. I put the box back, but lower this time, on the shelf I could reach without the stool. Some part of me already knew I'd want it close. 2 weeks passed. The newlyweds went to the Smoky Mountains. I stopped the automatic mortgage transfer, the one I'd set up 5 years before, and the small mechanical click of canceling it felt louder than it should have. Then my mother called. She had her warm voice on, the one she uses when she wants something and has decided to be charming about it. We talked about the wedding, the flowers, how thin Aunt Patrice looked. Then she got to it, smooth as a card slid across a table. "Your father and I have been thinking," she said. "Now that the house is Megan's, it doesn't make sense for us to rattle around looking for some apartment. We thought we'd settle up at the lake. It's so peaceful there. We'd take the upstairs room. You're hardly ever up there during the week anyway." She said it as though she were doing me a favor, as though the lake house were a spare coat in a closet we all shared. I noticed my own heartbeat. I noticed that my voice, when it came, was perfectly level. The bookkeeper's voice. The one that delivers bad numbers to nervous clients. I told her I'd need to think about it. There was a small pause on the line, the kind that means a person expected a yes, and got a maybe. Then she laughed, light and certain, and said, "Think about what, honey? It's family." After we hung up, I sat very still. "Make sure your paperwork's in order," Nina had said. I took the box down off the shelf and set it on my desk, and this time I didn't put it back. I met Nina the next evening at the diner we've been going to since we were 20. I brought the box. I laid it all out between the napkin dispenser and the ketchup, and I watched her read each page with the flat, careful attention I'd seen her give to documents that decided people's lives. She is not a lawyer, and she said so twice, the way honest people in her line of work always do. But she's read more contracts than most attorneys, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. The deed to the lake house was clean. One owner. Me. No joint tenancy, no quiet claim by anyone, nothing my parents' summers had legally earned them. "They have a story about that house," she said. "They don't have a single page." Then she tapped the promissory notes. "These, on the other hand, these are real. Signed, dated, consistent. This is a debt, Tori. A documented debt your parents owe you against a house they just transferred to your sister." I felt something turn over in my chest, slow and certain. I told her I didn't want to ruin anyone. I didn't want to drag my parents into court or take a house from my newlywed sister. That isn't who I am. Nina nodded like she'd expected exactly that. "Then don't," she said. "You don't have to do a single aggressive thing. You just have to stop lying for them. Stop pretending the story is the truth. Let the paper say what the paper says out loud, in front of the people who only ever heard their version." That was the moment my way finally had a shape. Not revenge, just the end of my silence. I hadn't given my mother an answer. "I want you to remember that, because it matters for what happened next." I had said I'd think about it. 3 days later, I drove up to the lake on a Saturday to close the place down for a coming storm, and there were 2 cars in my gravel drive. My parents' sedan, and Brent's enormous black truck. The back of the sedan was open. There were boxes in it. Labeled boxes. Kitchen. Bathroom. Dad's books. My mother was on my porch. On my porch. With a tape measure, holding it up against the front window like she was pricing curtains. My father stood by the dock with his hands in his pockets, not quite looking at anything. Megan and Brent were carrying a lamp between them toward my front door. I parked and got out, and the gravel was very loud under my shoes. My mother turned and smiled at me, delighted. Not caught. Delighted. "There you are," she said. "We thought we'd start measuring. The upstairs gets such good morning light." I asked, very quietly, what they thought they were doing. And Brent, hefting the lamp, answered for all of them with the easy confidence of a man who has never once been told no by this family. "Getting your folks settled," he said. "It's the right thing, Tori. Family property should go to the family that needs it." There it was, the sentence that would echo through everything that followed. I looked at the boxes in the car, at the tape measure in my mother's hand, at the lamp halfway to my door, and I understood that in their minds, the decision had already been made. They were not asking. They were moving in. I did not throw anyone out. The storm was coming, the light was going, and 4 people I was raised with were standing on my property with a car full of their lives. So I did the thing I always do. I made it civil. I said we'd talk inside, and I made coffee in my own kitchen while my family arranged themselves around my table like they were interviewing me for the right to stay. My mother led. She always leads. She spoke about her knees, about the stairs at any apartment they might rent, about how a person their age shouldn't be starting over with a lease. Every word was reasonable. Every word skipped neatly over the fact that none of this was theirs to plan. Megan chimed in, gentle and certain, the way she's certain about everything that benefits her. "You really don't use it much, Tori," she said. "It just sits empty. Wouldn't it feel good to know Mom and Dad are happy here?" And Brent, leaning back in my chair, delivered the line again, sharpening it this time. "Property should go to the family that needs it," he said. "You've got the apartment in town, you're fine. They need this." I felt the old yes rise in me, automatic, ancient, the reflex of 30 years. I felt how easy it would be to give them this too, to be the steady one final time and hate myself quietly, forever. My father said nothing. He just looked at his coffee. And I realized the silence in that kitchen was made entirely of things I had paid for and never named. So I stood up, and I crossed to the bookshelf where I'd set the box that morning, and I took down the lid. I didn't pull out the deed. Not yet. That wasn't the moment for it, and some instinct told me that flinging legal paper at my mother across a coffee cup would only make me the villain in her version. Instead, I reached past the notes and the statements to the very bottom of the box, where a single folded sheet had lived for 5 years, soft at the creases from one early reading. It was a letter. My father had written it the week I started covering the mortgage and mailed it to my apartment, which is a thing my father has done maybe 3 times in his life. I had read it once, and then I had put it away because it hurt to keep where I could see it. I unfolded it now at my own kitchen table, and I didn't read it out loud. I just set it down in front of him, facing him, and I watched his face change. The handwriting was his. "Tori," it said. "I know what I'm doing. I'm asking my own daughter to save this whole family, and I don't have any right to. You never make me feel small for it, which is more than I deserve. I'll pay you back somehow, even if it takes me the rest of my life. I'm sorry it's you again. It's always you. And you never once asked why. Love, Dad." My father put his glasses on with a hand that wasn't steady. He read his own words. The kitchen had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. My mother reached for the letter and I covered it with my palm, gently, and I said the only thing that was true. "I kept everything," I told them. "Not to use it. I just never learned how to throw away a promise." Nobody moved. Outside, the first rain hit the lake. My mother recovered fast. She always does. The softness that had crossed the room when my father read that letter, she gathered it up and folded it away, like it embarrassed her. She said the letter was a long time ago. She said, "Your father gets emotional." She said with a small laugh that none of this changed the simple fact that family helps family, and that I had plenty and they had a little, and what kind of daughter lets her parents go without. I let her finish. Then I said no. I said it quietly. Once, the way you stayed a closing balance. I told them I loved them, that I would always make sure they were safe and housed, that I would even sit down and talk honestly about the money between us for the first time. But the lake house was mine. They would not be moving in. And I was done pretending otherwise to keep the peace. The table was silent. Megan's mouth opened and closed. Brent's jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. And my mother looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had never seen her wear, something cold sliding in behind her eyes. Then she did the thing the whole story turns on. She smiled. Not a warm smile. A small, certain, almost pleased smile. The smile of a woman who has just decided something and is content to let you find out later. She stood, smoothed her slacks, and told everyone it was time to go before the roads got bad. She gathered her purse. She walked out into the rain to the car full of boxes they would not be unpacking here. She did not slam the door. She did not raise her voice. She just smiled. And left. And I should have been more afraid of that smile than I was. The next morning was a Sunday. I was back at my apartment in town, sitting at my own kitchen table with coffee and the crossword, the storm long blown through, everything washed and quiet. I had slept badly, but I had slept. I remember thinking the worst was over, that I'd said the hard thing and survived it, that whatever frost had come into my mother's face would thaw the way her moods always eventually did. Then someone knocked on my door. 3 firm knocks, evenly spaced, not the knock of a neighbor. I opened it, and there was a sheriff's deputy on my step. Young, polite, with a clipboard and the careful neutral expression they're trained to wear. He asked if I was Tori Sinclair. He said my name like he was reading it off something. Then he told me a report had been filed. A report against me. My parents, he said, had come into the station that morning and made a complaint that their adult daughter was wrongfully withholding family property from them, and that she had been, and here he chose his words carefully, taking financial advantage of her elderly parents. The coffee in my hand went strange and far away. Taking financial advantage of my parents. The phrase was so backward, so perfectly inverted, that for one full second I couldn't make my mouth work. I had carried that house for 5 years. I had loaned them a small fortune and never charged a dime of interest. And my mother had walked into a sheriff's station and described me as the one preying on them. That was the smile. That was what the smile had meant. She hadn't lost. In her mind, she had simply changed the game to one where the paper didn't matter, where the only thing that counted was who told the story first. Here is where the bookkeeper saved me. If you panic when someone in a uniform says financial advantage, you make noise, you protest, you cry, and you look exactly like a person with something to hide. I didn't panic. I had spent 15 years sitting calmly across from people who were terrified of being audited, telling them the same thing every time. The truth is boring, and the truth has paperwork. So I invited the deputy in. I offered him coffee, which he declined, and I asked him to give me 90 seconds. I went to my office and I came back with the deed to the lake house and my driver's license, and I laid them on the table side by side. One owner, Tori Sinclair. The address matched. The name matched. He looked at it for a while. I told him evenly that this was my home, purchased 4 years ago with my own funds, and that my parents had been summer guests who now wished to move in permanently, and that I had declined. I told him there was a great deal more paper if he wanted it. He didn't need it. He set the clipboard down and his whole posture changed, the way a person relaxes when a thing they were told was a crisis turns out to be a family argument. He explained kindly that this was a civil matter, a property dispute, not a crime. He could not remove me from my own deeded home, and frankly, he said, the financial abuse angle didn't hold up against a document with my name on it as sole owner. I thanked him. He paused at the door and added quietly, "For what it's worth, ma'am, the person who actually owns the house usually isn't the one being taken advantage of." Then he was gone, and I stood in my kitchen and started, finally, to shake. It took 2 days for the story behind the story to leak out. The way these things always do in a family that can't keep a secret to save its life. It was Brent's idea. Of course it was. My sister told me herself, in a rushed, defensive phone call she made the second she got scared. Brent had convinced my parents that the way to get the lake house was to establish, on the record, that they were the wronged party. Get there first. File the complaint. Make me the predator before I could think to make myself the victim. He had assumed, the way confident men assume, that somewhere there must be paperwork proving the lake house belonged to the family, because in his world, property always belongs to whoever feels entitled to it most loudly. The detail that undid them was simple. Brent had never once imagined the deed had only my name on it. Neither had my mother. They had told their story so many times that they'd come to believe the law would back it up. Megan's voice on the phone was thin and high. "Tori, is it true the house is only in your name? Only yours?" She kept saying it like she needed me to deny it. And underneath her panic, I could hear the thing she'd never had to face before. The first crack in the family religion that said whatever Megan and her mother wanted was simply how reality worked. I told her yes. Only mine. Always. Only mine. There was a long silence, and then she said something that told me the ground had shifted under all of them. "Mom is furious," she whispered. "She's calling everyone. She's planning a whole thing at the lake. She wants the aunts there. She wants that officer there. She says you'll have to explain yourself in front of everyone." My mother's plan was a family meeting, and you have to understand that in my family, a meeting is not a conversation. It is a court. My mother has held them my whole life, in living rooms and on patios, gathering whichever relatives she could count on to nod, and then prosecuting whoever had failed her that season. She always wins them, because she controls the venue, the guest list, and the story, and because the rest of us were raised to confuse her certainty with authority. This time, she said it at the lake. My lake. The audacity of it would have been funny if it hadn't been so precise. She would hold court on my own property, surrounded by my furniture, to prove that the property was really the family's, and that I was the selfish one keeping it from her sick husband and her good name. She invited both my aunts, Patrice and Lynn, who have witnessed every Sinclair tribunal for 40 years. And she did one more thing, the thing that showed me she truly did not understand what she was holding. She called the sheriff's office and asked that deputy to come, framing it as a welfare check, so he could witness the disturbed daughter refusing to do right by her parents. She wanted law enforcement in the audience. She was so sure the uniform would side with the story over the paper that she invited the very person who had already read my deed. When Megan told me that part, I actually closed my eyes and breathed out, slow, because I finally understood that I wasn't walking into an ambush. My mother was building a stage, inviting witnesses, and demanding I bring my explanation. She thought she was summoning me to my judgment. She was really just guaranteeing me an audience. I spent the next few days getting ready, and getting ready, for me, means copies. I am not a woman who walks into a room and improvises her own defense. I made a folder for each person who would be there. In each one, I put a clean copy of the deed, the 5 promissory notes with both my parents' signatures, the bank statements with 5 years of payments highlighted, and a single summary page on top. Plain numbers, no adjectives, the running total of what I had paid against a house that had been given to my sister. I did not put my father's letter in the folders. That belonged to him and me. I called Nina the night before and read her my plan, and she stopped me on one thing. "Don't argue," she said. "Whatever your mother says, however ugly it gets, don't defend yourself. The second you argue, it becomes 2 people's opinions, and she's better at opinions than anyone alive. You're not there to win an argument. You're there to hand out facts and let the room do the rest. Stay quiet. Let the paper talk." I wrote that down on the inside flap of my own folder. Let the paper talk. I slept 4 hours. In the morning, I dressed the way I dress for my hardest client meetings, plain and pressed, nothing to apologize for. I loaded the folders into a canvas bag, and just as I was leaving my apartment, my phone rang, and it was my father, alone, his voice so low I had to press the phone hard to my ear to hear him at all. "Tori," he said, "please, don't bring the letter. Your mother doesn't know I ever wrote it. If she finds out, it'll break something I can't fix." And then he was quiet, waiting. A man caught between the 2 women in his life. I stood in my doorway with my keys in my hand and my father breathing on the line, and I felt the whole weight of who I'd always been pulling at me. The good daughter would protect him. The good daughter would carry his secret the way she'd carried everything else, would walk into that meeting and take the blows and keep his letter folded in the dark forever, because that's what steady people do. They absorb. They hold. They make sure the fragile ones never have to feel the floor shake. And for a moment I almost promised him. Then I asked him a question instead. Gently, because I was not angry at my father. I have never really been angry at my father. "Dad," I said, "if you know I'm telling the truth, why are you letting her do this?" The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear a clock somewhere in their kitchen, the same clock from my childhood. "Because I'm a coward," he said finally, and his voice cracked on the word. "Because it's easier to let you be strong than to make her stop. It's always been easier." It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years, and it broke my heart and freed me at the same time. I told him I wouldn't read his letter to the room. I meant it. But I told him I was going to tell the truth about the money, all of it, and that he could either sit there while his wife called me a thief, or he could find, just once, the thing he'd never found before. I didn't say the word. I let it hang. Then I told him I loved him, and I hung up, and I drove 40 minutes north to my own house to be put on trial. They were already there when I arrived, arranged in my backyard like a painting of a trial. My mother had set my own patio chairs in a loose semicircle facing one empty chair, The defendant's chair, mine. Aunt Patrice and Aunt Lynn sat to one side with the stiff, thrilled posture of women who love nothing more than a family reckoning. Megan and Brent stood near the dock. My father sat at the edge, half turned away, looking at the water. And there, near the back, in plain clothes but unmistakable, was the deputy. The same young man who had read my deed in my kitchen, holding a paper cup of coffee, my mother had no doubt pressed on him. My mother stood in the center of my yard like she owned the light. She did not wait for me to sit. She began the moment my feet hit the grass, her voice pitched for the cheap seats, performing for the aunts, for the officer, for the lake itself. She told them I had always been difficult, cold, that I measured love in dollars, that I had a house sitting empty while my father, my sick father, needed somewhere to grow old, and that I was choosing my pride over my own parents. She was good. I'll give her that until the day I die. She built it beautifully, brick by brick, and I watched my aunts' faces harden against me exactly as she intended. Then she turned to me, certain of her verdict, and delivered the line I had heard my whole life, the one she'd used to load me up since I was a girl. "You're the steady one, Tori," she said, soft now, almost tender, for the audience. "You've never needed anything. You don't need this house. Why are you doing this to your family?" The yard waited. 2 aunts, 2 newlyweds, 1 deputy, 1 silent father, 1 lake going gold in the evening. And me, standing in the grass I'd paid for, holding a canvas bag full of the truth. I did not raise my voice. I want you to picture this, because it's the whole point of everything I am. My mother had just performed for 10 minutes, and the natural thing, the human thing, would have been to perform back, louder, to match her heat with my own. I had every reason. I chose the other thing. I set my bag down on the patio table and I opened it, and I started handing out folders. 1 to Aunt Patrice, 1 to Aunt Lynn, 1 to Megan, whose hand was already trembling. 1, after a pause, to the deputy, who took it with a small nod. I did not give 1 to my mother. I gave her nothing to hold. "I'm not going to argue with you," I said, and my voice was so quiet the lake almost swallowed it, so they all had to lean in to hear. "I'm just going to show you what's true." I told them, plainly, what was in the folder. The deed to the house we were standing on. 1 name. Mine. Bought with my own money 4 years ago. Then I told them about the other house, the family house, the one given to Megan at the wedding. I told them that for 5 years, I had paid its mortgage, that without those payments there would have been no house to give anyone. And then I told them to turn to the signed notes, where, in my parents' own handwriting, year after year, they had acknowledged the debt. The yard went so silent I could hear the dock creak. Aunt Patrice's mouth opened as she read. Aunt Lynn put her hand to her throat. I looked at my mother, who for once in her life had nothing to say, and I gave her the only sentence I'd rehearsed. "I'm not taking anything from anyone," I said. "I'm just done paying for a house that was given away without me." The deputy was the one who ended it, and he did it without raising his voice either. He read the folder for a moment, the deed, the top summary page, and then he stood and addressed my mother directly, polite as ever, but final. He said that he'd already reviewed the ownership of this property earlier in the week, that it was, without question, a civil matter, and not a criminal one, and that there was nothing here resembling financial abuse. Then he added the part that took the air out of the yard. "Ma'am," he said to my mother, "if anything, these documents show your daughter is a creditor here, not the other way around. I'd be careful about repeating that abuse claim. False reports are their own kind of trouble." And he tipped his head to me, and he left, walking back around the house to his car, and we all listened to it start and pull away. That was when my mother broke. Everything she had been holding in that rigid, certain body came apart at once. She did not cry. My mother doesn't cry. She turned on me with her voice finally loud, finally ugly, finally showing the room the thing I'd lived with privately for 30 years. "You kept secret papers on your own parents?" she shouted. "You sat at my table and smiled, and the whole time you were collecting evidence, after everything we gave you?" And I looked at her, calm in a way I had never once managed in front of her before, and I said the truest accounting I have ever made out loud. "You gave Megan a house," I said. "You gave me a stack of IOS you forgot you signed." Patrice made a small sound. Lynn looked at the grass, and my mother stood in the center of the yard she had tried to take, surrounded by people who had just read, in her own handwriting, exactly what she'd spent a lifetime making sure no one ever counted. Megan was still holding her folder. I watched her read the summary page a second time, and I watched the moment the real number landed, the moment she understood that the house she'd been gifted at her own wedding came with a documented debt attached, a debt owed to me, legally, against the very walls she now lived in. Her face went pale. She looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives there was no certainty in it, none of the easy assumption that the world would simply arrange itself around her comfort. "What does this mean?" she asked, and her voice was small. "For the house. For us." I could have frightened her. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted, that some part of me didn't want her to feel, for one afternoon, a fraction of the ground I'd spent 5 years standing on alone. But I'm not my mother. I don't win by making people smaller. Brent, who had been so loud in my kitchen, who had told me 3 times that property goes to the family that needs it, had gone completely silent by the dock, and that silence was its own kind of justice. So I turned to him, and I gave him his own words back, gently, like handing someone a coat they'd dropped. "You were right, Brent," I said. "Property should go to the family that paid for it." He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The whole architecture of entitlement that had organized my family for 30 years had just been laid out on a patio table in plain numbers, and not one of them could find a single page to argue with. The lake had gone fully gold now. Somewhere, a boat motor hummed. And for the first time, the loudest thing in a Sinclair gathering was the quiet. I did not take my sister's house. I want to say that clearly, because I know how these stories are supposed to end, with the wronged one seizing everything and walking off victorious. That isn't what happened, and it isn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to stop being invisible, and that, it turned out, was a thing I could give myself without taking a single wall from anyone. I made them an offer at that table, while the evening cooled. I would forgive the debt. All 5 years of it, wiped clean, no payments, no claim against Megan's house. On 3 conditions, and I had brought those in writing too, because I had finally learned that in my family, a kindness spoken aloud evaporates by morning. First, that my parents would stop, permanently, treating my property and my money as a shared family resource. Second, that they would arrange their own retirement honestly, with the income they actually had, and that I would help them do it, as their daughter and not as their bank. And third, a real apology, not to the room, to me, out loud at that table, in front of the same aunts who had just watched me prosecuted. My father went first. He signed the page with a hand that shook, and then he looked up at me with his eyes wet and he said he was sorry, that he'd known the truth for 5 years and let me carry it, because it was easier, and that no daughter should have to be that strong for that long. My mother took the longest. She stood at the edge of the patio with her arms crossed, and I genuinely did not know if she would do it. But the aunts were watching, and the papers were real, and the story she'd lived inside her whole life had finally hit a wall it couldn't talk its way around. She signed last. Her apology was thin and stiff, and clearly cost her everything she had. It wasn't much, but it was the first time my mother had ever said the words "I'm sorry" to me, and meant even a little of it, and I decided that little was enough to build on. I kept the lake house. I stopped the payments on the other one for good, and when I drove home that night, 40 minutes of dark water on my left, I rolled the windows down and let the cold come in, and I felt something I'd never felt after a family gathering in my entire life. I felt like a person who had been in the room, not the wall, not the steady one. A person, finally counted, finally there. Love isn't the same as being available to be used, and keeping a clear record of what you give is not cold. It's just remembering your own worth out loud. If you made it all the way here, you already know how this one feels. The quiet daughter, the forgotten receipts, the smile right before the knock on the door. Maybe you've been the steady one too. The wall everyone leans on and no one ever thanks. If Tori's boundary gave you even a little courage tonight, tell me in the comments where you found yours. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. Because the people who give the most quietly deserve, at least once, to have the last word said out loud. Your story might be the one